Marcus Chen straightened his diplomatic uniform one last time before stepping into the grand reception hall of the space station Concordia. The massive chamber stretched out before him like a cathedral made of metal and glass. Stars sparkled through the transparent walls, creating a backdrop that reminded everyone present they were floating in the void between worlds. The reception was supposed to be simple. Representatives from dozens of alien species mingled in small groups, their translators buzzing quietly as they converted speech into sounds each race could understand. Marcus had attended many such events over his 10 years as a human ambassador, but tonight felt different. Tonight, the future of humanity hung in the balance. The Veltar Empire had ruled this section of the galaxy for over 2,000 years. They were ancient, powerful, and deeply suspicious of younger species like humans. For the past 5 years, tensions had grown between the Terran coalition and the Empire. Border disputes, trade disagreements, and cultural misunderstandings had brought both sides to the edge of war. Marcus moved through the crowd, nodding politely to various aliens. The Krillian ambassador clicked his mandibles in greeting. A pair of Zephyrian diplomats floated past, their gaseous forms contained within environmental suits. Near the refreshment tables, several species Marcus didn't recognize sampled foods from across the galaxy. But it was the Veltar delegation that drew his attention. They stood together in a tight group, their tall, angular forms draped in flowing robes of deep purple. Their skin was pale blue-gray, and each had 4 eyes arranged in pairs on either side of their elongated heads. Most were middle-aged by their standards, but one caught Marcus's eye immediately. She was clearly very old, even by Veltar measures. Her skin had a translucent quality and her movements were slow and careful. Unlike the others, she wore simple white robes instead of purple. The younger Veltar treated her with obvious respect, stepping aside whenever she moved and listening carefully when she spoke. Marcus had done his research. This had to be Zarathes, the eldest member of the Veltar High Council. She was rumored to be over 800 years old, though the exact age of Veltar was always difficult to determine. What he hadn't expected was for her to be staring directly at him. When their eyes met across the room, Marcus felt a strange chill run down his spine. All 4 of her eyes were fixed on him with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. He smiled and nodded politely, as he would to any other diplomat, but she didn't respond. She just kept staring. Marcus tried to focus on his mission. The peace talks would begin tomorrow, and there were still several key points he needed to discuss with other ambassadors before then. The human delegation had worked for months to prepare for these negotiations. They couldn't afford to let personal discomfort derail their efforts. He moved toward a group of neutral species representatives, hoping to gauge their support for the human position. The Altarian ambassador was known to be reasonable, and her species often served as mediators in galactic disputes. As Marcus approached, he noticed something odd in his peripheral vision. The elderly Veltar woman was following him, not obviously, but every time he looked in her direction, she was closer than before. When he stopped to speak with the Altarians, she positioned herself nearby, close enough to overhear but not so close as to seem intrusive. During his conversation with the Altarian ambassador about trade routes, Marcus caught the old woman staring at his hands. More specifically, she was staring at the simple metal ring on his right hand. It was nothing special, just a plain band of titanium steel alloy that had belonged to his grandfather. Marcus wore it as a reminder of family and duty, but it hardly seemed like something that would interest an alien diplomat. The conversation with the Altarians went well, and they seemed willing to support a peaceful resolution to the human-Veltar dispute. But throughout the discussion, Marcus remained acutely aware of the elderly Veltar woman's presence. Her intense gaze never wavered, and it always seemed to focus on his ring. As the evening progressed, Marcus mingled with representatives from various species. He discussed mining rights with the crystalline Geodians, debated shipping regulations with the aquatic hydros, and even shared a laugh with the insectoid Manthari about the challenges of interspecies cuisine. But no matter where he went or who he spoke with, the old Veltar woman was always nearby, always watching. Finally, as the reception began to wind down, Marcus decided he had to address the situation directly. The woman's behavior was becoming disruptive, and he couldn't afford to have mysterious tensions affect tomorrow's negotiations. He excused himself from a conversation about mineral imports and walked directly toward her. She stood alone now, the other Veltar having moved to a different part of the room. Up close, Marcus could see that her age had not diminished her intelligence. Her 4 eyes were sharp and alert, studying him with the intensity of a scientist examining a rare specimen. "Good evening," Marcus said, activating his universal translator. "I'm Marcus Chen, representing the Terran Coalition. I don't believe we've been formally introduced." The old woman's translator took a moment to process his words before responding in the melodic tones typical of Veltar speech. When the device converted her words to English, her voice was soft but carried an unmistakable weight of authority. "I am Zarathes of the High Council," she said. "I have been watching you, Ambassador Chen." "So I noticed," Marcus replied carefully. "Is there something I can help you with?" For a long moment she didn't answer. Her 4 eyes continued to study him, but now they seemed to focus even more intently on his right hand. Marcus glanced down at his grandfather's ring, then back at her face. "That ring," she said finally, her translated voice carrying a note of something Marcus couldn't quite identify. Surprise, fear, recognition? "Where did you get that ring?" Marcus looked down at the simple band again. In the artificial lighting of the reception hall, the faint etchings on its surface were barely visible. He had always assumed they were decorative marks, perhaps added by his grandfather or even his great-grandfather. "It belonged to my grandfather," he said honestly. "It's been in my family for generations. Nothing special, really, just a family heirloom." Zarathes stepped closer, her movement suddenly more urgent despite her obvious age. The other aliens in the vicinity began to notice the interaction, their conversations growing quieter as they watched. "May I see it more closely?" she asked, her voice now definitely carrying an edge of urgency. Marcus hesitated for a moment, then extended his hand. The old Veltar woman leaned forward, her 4 eyes examining the ring from different angles. As she did, Marcus heard her make a sound that his translator couldn't convert, something between a gasp and a whistle. When she straightened up, her pale skin had somehow grown even paler. She looked at Marcus with an expression he couldn't read, then at the ring, then back at his face. "Ambassador Chen," she said, her voice now barely above a whisper. "We must speak privately. What I have to tell you will change everything." The reception hall suddenly felt very quiet, despite the dozens of conversations still taking place around them. Marcus looked into Zarathes's 4 eyes and saw something there that made his heart beat faster. Whatever was happening, whatever she had recognized in his simple family ring, it was about to turn his world upside down. Marcus followed Zarathes through the corridors of the space station, his mind racing with questions. The elderly Veltar moved with surprising speed despite her age, her white robes flowing behind her as they walked away from the reception hall. Other diplomats they passed in the hallways nodded respectfully to both of them, but Marcus barely noticed. They entered a small conference room that the station provided for private diplomatic meetings. The walls were plain metal, and a simple table sat in the center with chairs designed to accommodate various alien physiologies. Zarathes activated a privacy shield that would prevent anyone from listening to their conversation, then turned to face Marcus. "Please, sit," she said, gesturing to one of the human-designed chairs. Her translator was working perfectly, but Marcus could hear a tremor in her original voice that the device couldn't quite hide. Marcus sat down, placing his hands on the table. The ring on his right hand caught the room's lighting, making the faint etchings slightly more visible. Zarathes took a seat across from him, all 4 of her eyes focused on the simple metal band. "You said this ring belonged to your grandfather," she began, her voice careful and measured. "Can you tell me more about him? About how he came to possess it?" Marcus thought about his grandfather, a man he had loved deeply but who had died when Marcus was only 12 years old. His name was James Chen. He served in World War II, fighting in Europe. He never talked much about the war, but my grandmother told me stories after he passed away. "World War II," Zarathes repeated, and Marcus was surprised to hear that his translator didn't need to convert the term. "That was the global conflict on your world approximately 80 years ago, correct?" "That's right. My grandfather was a soldier in the United States Army. He fought in several campaigns, but the one that seemed to affect him most was the liberation of concentration camps in Germany. He saw terrible things there. Marcus paused, wondering why an alien diplomat would be interested in his family history. But I still don't understand why you're asking about this. Zarathus leaned forward, her 4 eyes never leaving the ring. The markings on that band, she said softly. Can you see them clearly? Marcus lifted his hand and examined the ring more closely. There are some faint etchings, but they're very worn. I always assumed they were decorative, maybe something my grandfather or his father added. May I? Zarathus extended one of her long, slender hands toward him. Marcus hesitated for only a moment before sliding the ring off his finger. It felt strange to remove it. He had worn it every day for the past 15 years, ever since his father had passed it down to him. He placed it carefully in Zarathus's palm. The elderly Veltar woman examined the ring with intense concentration, turning it slowly under the room's lights. As she did, Marcus could see the markings more clearly. They weren't random scratches or wear patterns as he had always assumed. They were symbols, deliberately carved into the metal in a style he didn't recognize. These markings, Zarathus said, her voice now barely above a whisper. They are not human in origin. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. What do you mean? They are Veltar script. Very old Veltar script. She looked up at him and Marcus could see something in her 4 eyes that looked almost like fear. This ring is not just any piece of jewelry. Ambassador Chen, it is a circle of eternal vigilance. I don't understand, Marcus said, though part of him was beginning to suspect that he really didn't want to understand. Zarathus set the ring gently on the table between them, but continued to stare at it as if it might suddenly disappear. Among my people, the Circle of Eternal Vigilance is our highest military honor. It is given only to warriors who have shown extraordinary courage in the face of impossible odds. In our entire history, fewer than 50 have ever been awarded. Marcus looked down at the simple metal band that had sat on his finger for so many years. But that's impossible. This ring has been in my family since the 1940s. My grandfather found it during the war. Found it where exactly? Zarathus asked, her voice sharp with sudden intensity. Marcus searched his memory for the stories his grandmother had told him years ago. In Berlin, near the end of the war, he was part of the unit that helped liberate the city. My grandmother said he found it clutched in the hand of a dying soldier, but they never identified who the man was. There was so much chaos, so many casualties from different armies. Zarathus made that untranslatable sound again, the one Marcus had heard at the reception. This time it lasted longer and it sounded almost like mourning. A dying soldier in Berlin, she repeated slowly. In 1945. Yes, that's what my grandmother told me. My grandfather tried to find out who the man was, to return the ring to his family, but there were no identification papers. The databases from that time period were incomplete, and with so many displaced persons. Marcus trailed off, seeing the expression on Zarathus's face. The elderly Veltar woman was staring at the ring with an intensity that made Marcus uncomfortable. Her 4 eyes seemed to be seeing something beyond the simple metal band, something from long ago. Tell me about your grandfather, she said suddenly. What kind of man was he? Marcus was confused by the change of subject, but he answered anyway. He was a good man, quiet, thoughtful. After the war, he became a teacher. He and my grandmother raised 4 children, including my father. He never talked about the fighting, but he always said the war taught him the importance of protecting innocent people. Protecting innocent people, Zarathus repeated. Yes, that sounds right. Sounds right for what? Marcus asked, his patience finally beginning to wear thin. Zarathus, I appreciate that this ring might be interesting to you from a historical perspective, but I need to understand why we're having this conversation. The peace talks begin tomorrow and— The peace talks, she interrupted, may no longer be necessary. Marcus stared at her. What do you mean? Zarathus reached across the table and picked up the ring again, holding it up to the light. This circle of eternal vigilance was awarded to my great-nephew Kethavar over 300 years ago. He was young, brilliant, and completely dedicated to the principles of honor and justice that our people hold sacred. Your great-nephew? Marcus felt like he was falling down a rabbit hole. But you said this was found with a dead soldier in World War II. That was only 80 years ago, and it was on Earth. Yes, Zarathus said simply. It was. The room fell silent except for the gentle hum of the space station's life support systems. Marcus tried to process what the elderly alien was telling him, but it didn't make sense. How could a Veltar military decoration end up on Earth decades before humans even knew aliens existed? Zarathus, he said carefully, are you saying that one of your people was on Earth during World War II? She nodded slowly, her four eyes still fixed on the ring. Not just on Earth, Ambassador Chen, in Berlin, fighting alongside your grandfather. Marcus felt the world shift around him. Everything he thought he knew about his family history, about human history, about first contact with alien species suddenly seemed uncertain. That's impossible, he said weakly. Is it? Zarathus asked. Your grandfather found this ring clutched in the hand of a dying soldier, whose identity was never discovered. A soldier who fought to protect innocent people, just as your grandfather did. A soldier who carried the highest military honor of an alien race that your people wouldn't encounter for another 30 years. She set the ring down in front of Marcus, and for the first time since they had entered the room, she smiled. Perhaps, she said softly, it is time you learned the real story of how this ring came to be in your family. Zarathus stood up slowly and walked to the small window that looked out into space. The stars beyond seemed to hold her attention for a long moment before she began to speak. 315 years ago, she said, her voice taking on the cadence of someone telling a story that had been passed down through generations. My great-nephew Kethvar was selected for a special mission. He was young for such responsibility, barely past his second century, but he had already distinguished himself as both a warrior and a scholar. Marcus picked up his ring from the table, turning it over in his hands as he listened. The metal felt different now, heavier somehow, as if it carried the weight of history he was only beginning to understand. The Veltar had been watching your species for some time, Zarathus continued, still looking out at the stars. We had observed your development from a distance, as we do with all emerging civilizations. Most species follow predictable patterns as they grow and learn. They develop technology, form governments, eventually reach for the stars. But humans were different. Different how? Marcus asked. Zarathus turned back to face him, her four eyes reflecting a sadness that seemed to span centuries. You were more violent than most species at your level of development, but also more compassionate. You created beauty and destroyed it in the same breath. You would sacrifice everything for strangers, then turn around and fight wars over the smallest differences. You were a puzzle we couldn't solve from observation alone. She returned to her seat, moving with the careful deliberation of someone carrying a great burden. So the High Council decided to send a scout mission. A small team would observe your species more closely, learning about your culture and psychology. They would determine if humans were ready for contact, or if they needed more time to mature as a civilization. Marcus thought about the state of the world in the 1940s, with global war raging and some of the worst atrocities in human history being committed. I can guess what conclusion they reached. Actually, Zarathus said with a slight smile, you probably cannot. But I'm getting ahead of myself. She gestured to the ring in Marcus's hands. Kethvar was chosen to lead the scout mission because of his unique qualifications. He was an expert in xenopsychology, trained in covert observation techniques and fluent in several human languages that he had learned from intercepted transmissions. Most importantly, he had the kind of moral flexibility that the Council thought would be necessary for dealing with a species as unpredictable as humans. Moral flexibility? Marcus asked. The ability to adapt one's ethical framework to new situations, Zarathus explained. Most Veltar are raised with very rigid concepts of right and wrong, but studying humans had taught us that morality itself might be more complex than we had previously understood. Kethvar was one of the few among our people who could consider that possibility without losing his psychological balance. Marcus found himself leaning forward, completely absorbed in the story. What happened to the mission? Their ship was small and designed for stealth rather than durability. When they entered your solar system, they encountered an unexpected solar storm. The electromagnetic interference overwhelmed their navigation systems and they crashed on Earth's surface. Zarathus paused, her expression growing darker. This was in late 1944, in what you now call Poland. The pieces were starting to come together in Marcus's mind, but the picture they formed was almost too incredible to believe. The crash killed 2 of the 3 scouts immediately, Zarathus continued. Kethvar survived, but he was badly injured and stranded on a world that was tearing itself apart with war. His communication equipment was destroyed, and he had no way to signal for rescue. For all practical purposes, he was dead to his own people. So what did he do? At first, he tried to remain hidden while his injuries healed. The Council's orders were clear. Under no circumstances should the mission reveal the existence of alien life to humans. But as he recovered, he began to witness things that challenged everything he thought he understood about your species. Zarathus stood up again and began to pace slowly around the small room. He saw the camps, Ambassador Chen, the systematic murder of innocents on a scale that even we, with all our study of human violence, had not imagined possible. But he also saw something else. What? He saw humans fighting against it. Not just armies fighting armies, but individuals putting their own lives at risk to save people they had never met. Resistance fighters smuggling children to safety. Soldiers sharing their rations with prisoners. Guards in the camps who secretly helped inmates escape, knowing they would be killed if they were caught. Marcus thought about his grandfather's stories. The few times the old man had been willing to talk about the war. My grandfather saw both sides of it too. It's part of what made him so committed to teaching after the war. He said he learned that people could choose to be better than their circumstances. Yes? Zarathus said softly. That is exactly what Kethvar learned. And it changed him. She returned to her seat and fixed Marcus with her four-eyed gaze. By early 1945, Kethvar had made a decision that would have shocked the Council if they had known about it. He chose to abandon his mission. Abandon it? He decided that the original plan was wrong. Instead of observing humans from a distance and judging whether they were worthy of contact, he concluded that some humans were already worthy of something more. They were worthy of help. Marcus felt a chill as the implications of her words sank in. He broke his cover. He did more than that. Using his natural shape-shifting abilities, he took on human form and joined the resistance. For the last 6 months of the war in Europe, a Veltar warrior fought alongside human soldiers and civilians, using his advanced knowledge and enhanced physical capabilities to save as many innocent lives as possible. The room fell silent as Marcus absorbed this information. His grandfather's ring suddenly felt much heavier in his hands. He fought in the Battle of Berlin, Zarathus continued, her voice now barely above a whisper. When Soviet and Allied forces converged on the city, Kethvar was there, still disguised as a human soldier. He had integrated himself so completely into your resistance networks that even he sometimes forgot he wasn't truly one of you, and that's where he died. Yes, but not before he had one final encounter with a human soldier who embodied everything Kethvar had come to admire about your species. A man who had fought his way across Europe not for glory or conquest, but because he believed it was the right thing to do. A man who had risked his own life dozens of times to protect civilians and prisoners of war. Marcus looked down at the ring, and suddenly the worn metal seemed to tell a story he had never imagined. Your grandfather, Zarathus said simply. In the ruins of Berlin, Kethvar met James Chen. The elderly Veltar woman reached across the table and gently touched the ring that Marcus held. And in his final moments, as he lay dying from wounds sustained while protecting a group of human refugees, Kethvar made one last choice that would have astounded the Council. He gave his most treasured possession, the symbol of everything he had achieved and everything he believed in, to the human who had shown him that some beings in the universe are worthy of any sacrifice. Marcus stared at the simple metal band, seeing it now not as a family heirloom, but as a bridge between worlds and species, forged in the crucible of war and sacrifice. He died believing that humans were capable of greatness, Zarathus concluded, and he wanted to make sure that belief was remembered. Marcus sat in stunned silence, staring at the ring that had suddenly become so much more than a family keepsake. The implications of what Zarathus had told him seemed to expand in his mind like ripples in a pond, touching every aspect of his understanding of history, family, and humanity's place in the universe. I need to understand something, he said finally, his voice hoarse. You said Kethvar was presumed dead by your people. How do you know all this? How do you know what happened to him in Berlin? Zarathus smiled sadly, and for the first time since they had begun talking, she looked every one of her 800 years. Because he wasn't entirely cut off from us. Veltar technology is more advanced than what your people had in the 1940s. His personal recorder survived the crash, and it continued to function even after his communication equipment was destroyed. She paused, seeming to gather herself before continuing. The device was designed to automatically transmit data whenever it detected Veltar ships in the area. For decades, it sat silent in the ruins where Kethvar had hidden it. But when our first official contact mission arrived at Earth 37 years later, the recorder finally transmitted its contents. Marcus felt another piece of the puzzle click into place. First contact. That was in 1982, wasn't it? When the Veltar delegation arrived at the United Nations. Yes. And you can imagine the shock when we received Kethvar's final transmission. Everything we thought we knew about the failed scout mission was wrong. Our people had died, yes, but one of them had lived long enough to completely rewrite our understanding of human nature. Zaratha stood up and moved to the window again, looking out at the stars as if she could see across the decades to that moment of discovery. The council was divided on how to interpret Kethvar's experiences. Some argued that his judgment had been compromised by isolation and injury. They believed that his positive assessment of humanity was the result of psychological trauma, not objective observation. And others? Marcus asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Others, like myself, believed that Kethvar had discovered something our distant observations had missed, that humans possessed a capacity for moral growth and self-sacrifice that made them worthy of respect, despite their obvious flaws and violent tendencies. Marcus thought about the decades since first contact, the slow and often difficult process of building relationships between humanity and the various alien species they had encountered. Is that why some Veltar have always been suspicious of us? Because there was disagreement about Kethvar's assessment? Partly yes, but also because Kethvar's actions violated one of our most fundamental principles. Zarathes turned back to face him, her expression serious. The prime directive, as you might call it. The rule that advanced species must not interfere in the development of less advanced ones. But he did interfere. Extensively, and in doing so he may have changed the course of human history in ways we can never fully measure. She returned to her seat, her movements more tired than before. Some of our people believe that humanity's rapid technological advancement since the war, your eventual development of space travel, even your social progress in areas like civil rights and international cooperation, might all be indirect results of Kethvar's intervention. Marcus felt overwhelmed by the weight of this revelation. So by fighting alongside the resistance, by helping to save lives and defeat the Nazis, he might have helped shape the entire future of our species. It's possible. We'll never know for certain, but what we do know is that the human civilization Kethvar died defending eventually became the one that reached for the stars and took its place among the galactic community. They sat in silence for a moment, both contemplating the vast implications of actions taken decades before either of them was born. There's something else, Zarathes said quietly, something that wasn't in Kethvar's recordings but that we learned later through our own investigations. What? Your grandfather didn't just find Kethvar dying in Berlin. According to witness accounts we were able to piece together years later, James Chen spent his last 2 days in the city, searching for medical aid for an unknown wounded soldier. He risked his life repeatedly, venturing into dangerous areas and using his own supplies and rations to keep Kethvar alive as long as possible. Marcus felt a swell of pride mixed with sorrow. That sounds like him. My grandmother always said he never could walk away from someone who needed help. Kethvar's final recording mentions this. He said that in James Chen, he had found the embodiment of everything he had come to admire about humanity. Courage, compassion, and an unwavering commitment to doing what was right, even when it was dangerous or costly. Zarathes reached across the table and gently took the ring from Marcus's hands, holding it up to catch the light. This ring represents more than military honor among our people, Ambassador Chen. It represents the highest ideals of our civilization. When Kethvar gave it to your grandfather, he was making a statement that transcended species and culture. He was saying that true honor knows no boundaries of race or origin. She handed the ring back to Marcus, who slipped it onto his finger where it had rested for so many years. Your grandfather carried that honor for the rest of his life without ever knowing its true significance. He passed it down to your father, who passed it down to you. For 3 generations, your family has been the keeper of a secret that bridges 2 worlds. Marcus looked down at the ring, seeing the faded markings in a completely new light. Why are you telling me this now? Why reveal the secret after all these years? Zarathes smiled, and for the first time since their conversation began, Marcus saw something hopeful in her expression. Because, Ambassador Chen, the time has come for that secret to serve its intended purpose. Kethavar didn't just give your grandfather a ring. He gave him a promise. A promise that someday, when our two species met again, there would be those among the Veltar who remembered his sacrifice and what it represented. She leaned forward, her four eyes bright with an intensity that reminded Marcus of her earlier stare across the reception hall. Tomorrow, you will enter the negotiation room expecting to argue for a peace treaty between our peoples. You will present your case for why the Veltar should trust humanity, why we should see you as worthy partners in the galactic community. Yes, that's my mission. But you won't need to make that argument, Ambassador Chen, because you've been carrying the proof of human worthiness on your finger for 15 years. Kethavar's sacrifice, your grandfather's heroism, and the honor that has been passed down through your family is evidence that our species have already been bound together by something far stronger than any treaty. Marcus felt his heart racing as he began to understand what she was suggesting. The High Council sent me to these negotiations with full authority to determine the Veltar Empire's position toward humanity, Zarathes continued. I came here expecting to negotiate the terms of a limited peace agreement. But that ring changes everything. She stood up, her bearing suddenly more formal, more official. Tomorrow, Ambassador Chen, I will not be discussing peace between our peoples. I will be recommending something that has never been offered to any species in galactic history. Something that Kethavar's sacrifice and your family's honor has proven humanity worthy to receive. The main conference hall of Concordia Station had been transformed for the historic negotiations. Representatives from dozens of species filled the observer galleries, while the central floor housed the primary negotiation tables. The Terran Coalition delegation sat on one side, the Veltar Empire delegation on the other, with neutral mediators positioned between them. Marcus took his seat with the human delegation, his grandfather's ring feeling heavier than ever on his finger. He had barely slept the night before, his mind racing with everything Zarathes had revealed. Around him, his fellow diplomats reviewed their prepared arguments and counter-proposals, unaware that everything they had planned might be about to become irrelevant. Across the room, the Veltar delegation arranged themselves with the formal precision that was characteristic of their culture. Zarathes sat at the center of their group, her white robe standing out among the purple garments of her colleagues. When she looked in Marcus's direction, she gave him the slightest of nods. The neutral mediator, an elderly representative from the Altarian Federation, called the session to order. We gather today to address the growing tensions between the Terran Coalition and the Veltar Empire. The goal of these negotiations is to establish a framework for peaceful coexistence and to prevent any escalation toward armed conflict. The human delegation leader, Ambassador Sarah Rodriguez, stood to present their opening position. She was an experienced diplomat who had spent months preparing for this moment. The Terran Coalition comes to these negotiations in good faith, seeking a fair and lasting peace between our peoples. We acknowledge that there have been misunderstandings and disputes, but we believe that dialogue and compromise can resolve any differences. Ambassador Rodriguez continued for several minutes, outlining the human position on trade routes, territorial boundaries, and cultural exchange programs. It was a well-crafted presentation that addressed all the major points of contention between the two species. When she finished, the Altarian mediator turned to the Veltar delegation. The floor now recognizes the Veltar Empire, but instead of the expected response from the delegation leader, Zarathes stood up. A murmur ran through the observation galleries as the ancient counselor stepped forward. Even among the Veltar, it was unusual for someone of her status to speak directly in negotiations rather than working through intermediaries. Honored mediator, distinguished delegates, observers from across the galaxy, she began, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's translation systems. I stand before you today not to negotiate the terms of peace between the Veltar Empire and the Terran Coalition. The murmur from the galleries grew louder. The human delegation exchanged puzzled glances, while several Veltar diplomats looked genuinely surprised by Zarathes's words. Instead, she continued, I come to propose something unprecedented in the history of galactic civilization. Zarathes walked slowly toward the center of the chamber, positioning herself where everyone could see her clearly. For over 2 millennia, the Veltar Empire has maintained its position as one of the dominant powers in this region of space. We have entered into treaties with dozens of species, established trade relationships, and occasionally granted protectorate status to developing civilizations. She paused, her 4 eyes scanning the assembled delegates. But never, in all our history, have we offered full partnership to another species. Never have we invited another civilization to join us as true equals in the governance of galactic affairs. The chamber fell silent. Marcus could feel his heart pounding as he realized what was about to happen. Today that changes, Zarathus announced. On behalf of the Veltar High Council, I extend to humanity an invitation to join the Empire not as subjects, not as junior partners, but as full equals in the Veltar Commonwealth. The silence that followed was profound. In the observation galleries, representatives from various species sat in stunned amazement. The human delegation looked as shocked as everyone else. Even the other Veltar diplomats seemed surprised by the scope of Zarathus's offer. This proposal, she continued, is based not on political convenience or strategic necessity, but on a recognition of human character that spans decades. It is based on proof of human honor that has been carried in secret for over 70 years. Zarathus turned to look directly at Marcus. Ambassador Chen, would you please join me? Marcus felt every eye in the chamber turn toward him as he stood up. His legs felt unsteady as he walked to the center of the room, but he forced himself to move with the dignity the moment required. Show them the ring, Zarathus said softly. With hands that trembled slightly, Marcus removed his grandfather's ring and held it up where the assembled delegates could see it. Under the chamber's bright lights, the faded Veltar markings were barely visible, but their significance was about to become clear to everyone present. This simple band of metal, Zarathus announced to the chamber, is a circle of eternal vigilance, the highest military honor of the Veltar Empire. It was earned over 3 centuries ago by my great-nephew Kethvar. For his service to our people, she gestured to Marcus, who still held the ring aloft. It came into human possession in 1945, in the ruins of Berlin when Kethvar gave it to a human soldier named James Chen, Ambassador Marcus Chen's grandfather. A wave of shocked murmurs ran through the chamber as delegates tried to process the implications of what they were hearing. For 77 years, Zarathus continued, this ring has been passed down through the Chen family, carried by men who embodied the very best qualities of their species. James Chen, who risked his life to save strangers. His son, who became a doctor and spent his career treating the poor. And now Marcus Chen, who has dedicated his life to building bridges between species and cultures. She moved to stand beside Marcus, her ancient presence lending weight to every word. But this ring represents more than one family's honor. It represents a bond between our species that was forged in humanity's darkest hour. When individuals chose to sacrifice everything for the principle that innocent life must be protected, Zarathus took the ring from Marcus and held it up for all to see. Kethvar died believing that humans possessed a capacity for moral courage that transcended their technological limitations. He believed that a species capable of producing individuals like James Chen was worthy of any sacrifice, any partnership, any honor that could be bestowed. She handed the ring back to Marcus, who slipped it onto his finger with hands that were now steady. The Veltar Empire's offer of full partnership is not a political gesture, Zarathus declared, her voice carrying to every corner of the chamber. It is the fulfillment of a promise made by a dying warrior to a human soldier in the ruins of a devastated city. It is recognition that true honor knows no boundaries of species or origin. She turned to address the human delegation directly. We do not offer this partnership because humanity is perfect. We offer it because humanity has proven, through individuals like the Chen family, that your species possesses the moral courage to grow, to learn, and to sacrifice for principles greater than yourselves. The chamber erupted in discussion as delegates tried to comprehend the magnitude of what they had just witnessed. The human delegation sat in stunned silence, while the Veltar diplomats engaged in urgent whispered conversations. But Marcus barely heard any of it. He stood in the center of the chamber, looking down at the simple metal band that had somehow bridged decades and light years to bring 2 species together. His grandfather had carried this ring, never knowing its true significance, never understanding that he had been chosen by a dying alien to represent the best of humanity. Zarathus placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. Your grandfather's heroism echoes across the years, Ambassador Chen. Today, it speaks louder than any argument we could make for why our peoples belong together. As the implications of the Veltar offer began to sink in throughout the chamber, Marcus realized that the peace negotiations he had come to conduct had become something far more significant. They had become the foundation for humanity's entrance into a larger galactic community, based not on power or technology, but on the simple recognition that character transcends species. The ring on his finger caught the light, its worn surface reflecting a future that his grandfather could never have imagined, but had helped to make possible through his actions in a war-torn city so many years ago. In that moment, Marcus understood that some bonds are stronger than time, distance, or even death itself, and sometimes the most important diplomacy happens not in conference rooms, but in the choices individuals make when no one is watching, when everything is at stake, and when doing the right thing is the only thing that matters.